There's no punctuation in the Torah. There are no periods, no commas, no question marks. We don't have the vowels that we rely on to read in Hebrew. We don't have even the cantillation marks, the trope that help us know how to sing from the Torah. When you look into a physical Torah scroll, the only thing that you'll find are breaks. That sometimes a line will begin with some words and end with some words with a gap in the middle. Sometimes they'll begin with some words and have an empty rest of the line, and then the Torah will continue on the next line. And every Torah portion begins following one of these breaks, either the closed break or the open break. Except for this portion of Vayechi, where it goes straight from last week's portion into this week's portion with not a single space between even the letters and the words. And our commentators want to know why. Why is this strange thing happen here? So Rashi, who's citing the Midrash to try and understand this phenomenon, says, well, it could be because the beginning of Parshat Vayechi describes the death of Jacob. Jacob spends the last 17 years of his life in Egypt with his family, reunited with his beloved Joseph before he passes away at the old age of 147. But when Jacob dies, that is the beginning of the slavery, of the bondage, of the difficulties and sorrow and hardship that are going to befall his children and his grandchildren, our ancestors, the Jewish people, Bnei Israel, until we get to the Exodus story that we read at Passover. And this direct moving from one portion to the next, he calls that satum, that it is closed. And it's like the closed, dimmed, heavy-lidded eyes of the Jewish people as their suffering begins. They have been weighed down by so much that they don't even realize this passage from the good old days to the days of hardship. Or, davar acher, it could be that Jacob, his eyes are closed. See, Jacob knew what was going to happen following his time in Egypt. He's been told by God in a few portions back. Abraham knew that his children would be slaves in Egypt and suffer bondage for hundreds of years. Isaac knew. Jacob knows, and our tradition says he continued to know and exercise prophecy and be able to see into the future of what would happen to his family. And so this closed transition also signifies the closing of Jacob's own ability to prophesy, so that he can't tell them what's coming. He can only tell them and reassure them that it will eventually end and good things will come, but he doesn't know when. We're right now celebrating the end of the secular year of 2020 and the beginning of 2021, and we also have this seamless transition. Right? December 31st moves directly into January 1st, and there isn't a moment between the two. And so we can read that transition and that seamlessness the same way that the rabbis do. We could say that we are so deeply in our hardship and our difficulties that we don't notice the transition, that our eyes are closed to it. Or it could be that, like Jacob, we don't have the prophecy to know exactly when, but we do have the hope to know that there is an end in sight coming. And so we are moving from one to the other without a definite end date. But there's one more read that I really like from one of my favorite commentaries, the Kli Yakar, and he says that leaving out the space, that closedness is actually the closing of Jacob's own suffering. Jacob lived a hard life. He spends his early years in conflict with his brothers, and then his prime in conflict with his father-in-law. Then he comes back to his own land, and he's in conflict with his neighbors. Then he thinks that his favored son Joseph is dead for decades, until finally, in these last 17 years, the words that open our Parsha, he's able to live Vayechi, and he's able to live fully and happily with his suffering and his hardships come to a complete close. As we also make a transition into a new year seamlessly from what came before it, I hope that that's what awaits us, that an end to our suffering is near, and that we can move and close this chapter of life, to borrow a phrase from our own tradition, I'm wishing you all a very happy and a very healthy new year. May we see one in happiness and peace together soon.